Well, welcome back to Schmattz Outdoors, everyone. Today we're going to go over something that I get questions quite often about. As you can see behind me here, hopefully, we're going to go over all the different types of stretchers I use for each species of animal that I can trap in my area, or that I catch in my area. I'm not going to go into measurements of each one in this video. So some of the species behind me I already have videos up on how I make these boards. So I'm not going to go into the measurements in this video. If you guys want to know, I will link the videos for each one. Because like the fox and the coyotes over here, I already have videos put up on how I make my stretchers. I make all my own stretchers, or almost all my own stretchers. I'm going to be making a couple more of raccoons and beaver boards here over the summer, so stay tuned for those videos. They'll be coming up probably after this video. I will link them down below when I get them done, so all my information will be in this video or in the description of this video, and you should be able to click right to the videos on how I make these boards. So we'll go right into the boards that I use. One caveat I want to say right at the top here: I'm a wood stretcher guy for almost all species except for muskrats. And I know that's a somewhat controversial thing among some trappers. Some people say muskrats especially, you got to put them on wood. Sure, go ahead. I like the ease of having wire stretchers for muskrats. I have a video up on how I form my muskrat stretchers, so they're actually really not stretching your muskrat, they're more of a form. And actually I want to make that point about all the stretchers behind me, is they're a form, not a stretcher. So you don't want to be stretching your animal to get them tight, you know, or to like get them to the next size increment on these boards. They're meant to be just a form to get your fur to dry in the right shape. All right, let's get into the boards here, and I have kind of some comments about each one. So first off, we'll just kind of show you the whole gamut. Starting at the end, we got coyotes, fox, otter. These three here are raccoon, beaver, mink, muskrats. There's some wire ones here you might not be able to see. And we got weasels down on the end. So let's start right over here. I got two different kinds of coyote boards. So as you guys have seen, this is my split design. I just got a nail right here on the bottom. You know, so the stretcher can open up. So I don't need a belly board with this design. It's 6 foot tall. Again, I mean, that's wider than I would ever probably stretch a coyote right now. That's how, you know, that's as wide as it will open. I really like the split boards for coyotes and for fox, so I have a split one for fox. Benefits of a split board is I do not need a belly board, and I can adjust. So two benefits: no belly board. Second benefit is I can adjust my stretcher according to the size of the animal. So if I catch a pup, there's no way I want it splayed open as far as I have it there. But if I catch a 40-pound male coyote, I may have to have him stretch that far to get him anywhere close to tight on there. I do have the size increment lines on this stretcher. I don't have them on all my coyote stretchers because I don't care. Again, I do not stretch my animals. I use these as a form. Almost all my coyotes end up beyond 2XL on here, beyond the bottom grade that they have. I think this is like the large line, this is XL or something. I forget what the gradients are on coyotes. Again, I don't pay any attention really to the line. So half of the coyote stretchers I have, I don't even have the increments on there, because again, I have a larger size coyote typically out here. Even my pups will typically grade past this line too. So, but I do have one solid coyote stretcher. I kind of started off with this guy, but I did reshape him. So I set this at my normal width, which is probably, You know, that's probably about how far I open it when I'm stretching a coyote. And then I laid this on my solid one, and then I trimmed it to accordingly to that. I do use it once in a while. I use it more as a spare. Originally, that was the only coyote stretcher I had, so that was the first one I made. And then I made some split ones. So I don't know. I like the solid one. But the only thing you do need is and I keep one on hand just for this stretcher, a solid belly board for that guy. So it's got to be tapered. It's roughly half at the top and it's 1.5 inches at the bottom. So with the solid wood one there, you do need to have the belly board for that guy. And for like coyotes, it's got to be fairly long because you don't cut like an inspection window or anything. You leave the animal whole. So basically I got to run from his nose all the way to his butt essentially. So that's about how long I need, and that board is marginally long enough for a few of them I've put on that board in the past. It's not the greatest board. This board here is 3/4 of an inch thick, made out of 1x4s. This is made out of 1/2 inch plywood. I know some guys don't like plywood for stretchers. They've worked out well for me. Again, it's simple. I can get a lot of stretchers out of one sheet of plywood. So as we go along, there's a few of these that are made out of plywood too. The only thing is, you know, you're like these pine boards, I can push the stick pins into them real easily. Some of these plywood boards, I actually got to like tap them in with a hammer. But once I kind of get going, it's like grab a pin, tap, 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 tap. And it really doesn't take me any longer to put them on a plywood board as opposed to a pine board or any of the other types of wood you want to use. All right, so again, on this board here, you can actually see these are the lines I use for actually marking it out to where the different widths or where the width change. You know, so this is like the shoulders. From here to this line here is basically a straight line, and then from that line down it's straight. But all right, so that's coyotes. So again, I have one solid one and I have 10 split ones. All right, I just thought of this and I should make a point as long as I just mentioned that. So the number of stretchers I have is basically what I think I want to or can put up in a weekend. I put up all my fur over the winter and I do it over the weekend. So I'll take fur out like Thursday night, and Friday, a good chunk of it's unthawed, and I will try to put up like, you know, 10 coyotes in one day, or 10 coyotes and a fox or whatever in one day. And then like on the next day, I'll put up, you know, the raccoons and beavers and whatever else. So the reason why I put the coyotes and fox up, say like on a Friday, is because I need to let them dry for a while and then turn them. So typically I wait till like the next day. So if I flesh them Friday, I can turn them Saturday and then they're ready to go. Where like the raccoons, skunks, beavers, all those things are so skin out, and I can just flesh them, put them on the boards and leave them. And I will leave them till like the next weekend, and then I'll take all those off the board so I can use them again. So I have about as many stretchers as I figure I can get fur put up in a weekend. There's a few like muskrats I do have more, but I'll explain why once I get down to those. But again, that's kind of the quantities I have of each one. That's kind of how I dictate it. And I also dictate how many I have of each one by the number of those species I typically catch in a season. It doesn't pay to have 50 coyote stretchers if I only catch 25 coyotes in a season every season. Well, why have all the extra stretchers if I never catch enough animals to actually use them? So I just want to make that point right off the top here. So coyote stretchers here, I got one solid one and I got 10 of the split ones. We'll move on to fox here. So again, I have my design for a split stretcher for my fox. This guy's only 5 foot tall. The shorter my stretchers are, the better I like them. Not for fox in particular, but for all of them. They're a little easier to maneuver around and everything else. Like coyotes, I basically need a 6 foot stretcher because, you know, my tails are usually right down towards the bottom. On fox, I figured I didn't need them quite that long, so they're only 5 footers. The split ones are only 5 footers. Same theory as the Coyote ones, I like them because I don't need belly boards and I can adjust the width depending on the size of the fox. So if I catch like a pup, I don't have to open it as far, or I don't open it as far. And if you catch like a big adult, I can open it all the way up. And so I'm getting a nice even stretch, or a nice even look on my animals when I'm stretching them. And then I do have the one solid board. Again, this one's 6 feet because it's just what I happen to have. These sizes that are on here aren't actually the right size. Those are actually Otter sizes, because I had this board kind of set up to do both, and then I actually dictated it by trimming the nose for just a fox. So those measurements don't match a fox. Again, with this board, I have a belly board here, so that's very important that you put it in there. The belly board for my Coyote's roughly 4 foot. This one here is like 3.5 foot. Again, because if you go from the nose down, I got to be to the butt of that Coyote there, or butt of that fox, sorry, you know. So I do have one solid fox board. Again, the same kind of theory as the Coyotes. That was the very first one I had. I actually meant it to be Otter and fox, and then I actually dedicated it just to fox. And then this is actually an Otter board, and we'll get to that in a second. But one solid board, I used it quite a bit over the years, but now I've actually made a few more split ones. I only had 3 split ones to begin with, but then a couple years ago I ended up with 16 fox, and only having 4 stretchers essentially. It took me over a month, if not more, to actually get all my fox put up. And I don't like having fox in my freezer very long, because they tend to freezer burn quicker than any other animal in my experience. So I actually I got 6 split ones and the 1 solid one if I do need it. Again, I don't want to leave fox in my freezer very long, because they tend to be the quickest animal to freezer burn. They don't have a lot of fat and their skin is super thin. So I've had issues in the past with them actually freeze drying in my freezer. So I want to get them put up as quick as I can. So I almost try to put them up the day I catch them, if I can. If I can't, I make sure I put up the first one caught is the first one put up. That way, they're, I'm not putting up the freshest ones, and then all of a sudden I get to the end and I got one that's been in there for 2 months and it is all freeze dried. So on fox in particular, I want to have as many stretchers as I catch fox, and I try to get them put up as quick as I can. But I do have the 1 solid one. Again, I got 1 belly board I keep just for that stretcher, just for fox, and I can use this longer one if I need to, and then I have 6 of the split ones. So again, the sizes that were written on this board here, I don't know how well you can see it, those are actually Otter sizes. I've never put an Otter up to sell him, but I did. I ended up making a dedicated Otter board, because my fox board, I trimmed it to match the fox pattern. These ticks all on here are all just making the actual stretcher themselves, some reference lines I used. One thing that I wanted to point out is I do mark what they are. So I got Otter on there. That one's a wide coon. That one's a narrow coon. That one just says coon on the bottom of it. Not that I don't know what it is, but again, I marked them all so I knew what they were. The size of my Otter, it's a 6 foot board. Again, it's made on plywood. This one's only 3/8 plywood, where like the Coyote one is 1/2 inch plywood. This is actually like I think it's supposed to be a 1/2 inch thick, but it ends up measuring roughly 3/8, but it's a spruce board. And I actually have one over here too. I had bought some of them early on. They're nice because you could push the pins in there a little easier than the plywood. But again, the plywoods stay straight, they don't warp. So that's one thing too, like that board there, this fox board has a pretty good warp in there, and that affects how your fur sets on there when you're putting the fur on there. The shape, the dimensions of the Otter board here, that is dictated by NAFA's Otter size. So all my the rest of these stretchers here, or the Raccoons in this Otter one, are dictated by the NAFA sizes. I know FHA sizes are a little bit different, but these have always stretched my fur in a shape that I like. It doesn't seem to overstretch them in any particular areas, anything like that. So yeah, it's a 6-foot long board. Again, I didn't mark the size gradients on here because I've never sold one to the market. But I may actually now, you know, I have several tanned and one full body mounted. So I may actually start selling some of the ones I catch unless I wanted to give them to somebody or something like that. But yeah, so I have one otter board. Again, I've caught 3 otters in my life. I've only ever used that a few times. So, but if you don't have that, then what do you put your otter on if you try to stretch them? I mean, you could tell the difference in shape between this otter board. You know, it's quite a bit wider at the top than like my raccoon boards here. Well, if I put an otter on a raccoon board, he's not going to look good at all, and then you're going to be overstretching the butt of him. So it's nice to have. I know, you know, yeah, it cost me part of a sheet of plywood to make that guy, but I'm glad I have it, like I said. All right, so we're just gonna set that guy over here a little bit. Give me a little more room here. So we're on to raccoon. Oh, this guy here, belly board. I end up using a long belly board. I have an extra one down in the basement. I just didn't carry it out. I use essentially the same size as you would use on a fox or coyote, depending on the size of your otter. But that one requires a belly board as well. All right, on to raccoons. I use all wood for my raccoons. I do have one wire stretcher and I have used it a few times early on in my trapping career, but I'm an all wood all the time guy now for raccoons. I've made all these stretchers myself. What we have is I actually have 3 sizes. So this stack here, there's actually 2 boards there, and I'll get into what each one is. This is NAFA's wide measurements. So it basically just gets a little wider as it goes down. Then this is the narrow version on their on NAFA's, because they have 3 sizes. And this one here is the small size, but actually it's only a 6-inch wide board to begin with. So it ends up being just a little narrower than it should be for their smallest size. And I'll explain why I have those and what I use those for as well as we get to them. So the largest size here, on the bottom I wrote coon wide is on there. It's kind of tough to see, but for these what I did is I actually took a scribe and I actually went and scribed each one of the size increments on there. Because my permanent marker, you can see like on this board, it just didn't hold up. So now I'm actually going to try and go this summer and I'm going to go through and scribe every one of my stretchers. You know, like you can see, it's like a little actual groove in my board there for the sizes. So I got from the smallest size marked, which I don't even know why I have it on this board, all the way to this is 6XL. And I get some 6XL raccoons every season. I get several 5s and tons of 4s every season. So what I have here, this is just an old board taken off an old barn. And I sized and shaped it to fit my make raccoon stretchers out of it. You can see like the rows of nails in here and here. I have a few made like this, and then I have a few made out of plywood. And there, I hope you guys could see the wide raccoon on the bottom there. So when I'm putting up my raccoons, so 2 things here. This one's 3/4 of an inch thick. This one's 1/2 inch thick. That does seem to make a little bit of difference when you're putting your raccoons on there. I actually prefer the thinner board just because you don't end up, you know, you get, you know, that extra 3/4 of an inch on each side. So it's actually, this board is actually stretching your fur a little bit more than what this board is because of that extra thickness. I use all of them, don't get me wrong. I have like 5 or 6 of these ones that are made out of barn boards, that are pine barn boards, and I have like 4 or 5 that are made out of plywood, and I use them all. There'll be a lot of weekends I'll have all these full, so I don't use one over the other any particular time. The plywood one, I just have permanent marker marks for all the size lines. Again, they're slowly like wearing off. So like up here, the small sizes are there. But you get down here, like this is 6XL right here. And I don't know if you guys will even be able to pick that up on camera. Here's 5XL4. So these guys here, I would typically always put my biggest raccoons on there. you know, the ones I know that are going to stretch 4XL and longer. If I think they're not going to stretch 4XL, I actually will go to my medium-sized board. So any of like the young of the year or some of the smaller females, I will put on the medium-sized one. So it's I don't know, like 3/4 of an inch or something narrower here at the shoulders, and like right here it's actually like an inch narrower than that one. So it just isn't quite as big, and it doesn't stretch them quite as wide. So there are some raccoons, like kits, don't typically, you know, they don't need to be stretched this wide. You're going to lose like probably a length by the difference between putting like a 2XL raccoon on here. Might only be an XL coon on this size of board. So that's kind of how I gauge it. If I think they're going to be 4XL or longer, I will put them on this stretcher. And if I think they're going to be a little shorter, I'll put them on these guys. So quite honestly, what I do is I flesh. I'll take out, you know, however many raccoons I want to put up for that weekend. I will flesh them all. I have rows of nails in my basement. If you've watched any of my videos, I have rows of nails in the floor joists in my basement. And what I do is I just hang them up as I get them done. Once I'm done with all of them, I'll figure out how many of the wide stretchers I have, you know, available that don't already have fur on them. And then I'll go through and figure out that many of the biggest ones, figure out the biggest ones for those. And as soon as those, I have enough figured out for those, then all the smaller ones go on to the next size down, the medium ones. For raccoons, I don't go any smaller than the NAFA medium size. It just, my raccoons are big enough, they never, you know, some of them are almost too big for that narrower board and probably should be put up on these. I just don't have enough of these sometimes to put all the big ones up. With that in mind too, I do sort of pay attention when I'm taking fur out of my freezer that I'm not taking out like 15 that are all going to be big giants, you know. I could tell by the weight of them and just the sizes they're folded up in my freezer, kind of roughly, you know, how big they are. And I'll make sure I only take out like 10 big ones, because that's roughly what I have for the wide size. And then I'll try and make sure I take out a few smaller ones. That way I have some to put on these smaller boards, because I don't want to be putting a 4 or 5, 6L raccoon on these smaller boards. So when I re-score all these to mark all the links again over the summer here, I'm not going to actually probably mark like the 5 and 6XL on these smaller boards, because if they're going to stretch 5 or 6XL on that board, they should be on these boards to begin with. So we're going to go over the small board here and what that is, and then we're going to kind of go back to both of these as well. So big raccoons on the biggest boards, smaller raccoons on the NAFA medium size boards. This is NAFA small size. I built these when I very first started. Again, the medium sized ones, all I have is 1/2 inch plywood ones. I don't have any that are pine boards or anything for the medium sized ones, or the narrow. So I actually got what I have written on here. I got wide coon and I got narrow coon on these. I don't have any of the narrower version that aren't plywood, so I use plywood exclusively, and I think I have like 6 of those. So I got roughly 10 wide ones, 6 or 7 narrow ones, and then I have a few of these that are made to the small dimensions. I want to mention these are 5-footers. All the large sized ones and the narrow sized ones I have are 5-footers. This one's a 4-footer. I've used it a few times when I very first started trapping, because that's what I could get for boards, until I just decided, well, I'm going to make some out of plywood. So I did use them for a few years. Again, on a 4-foot board, you know, like a 6L raccoon is 41 inches to the butt. Well, if I only got a 4-foot board, that doesn't leave me much for a tail down at the bottom of them. So I used them for a few years for some of the real small raccoons. But I don't use them really for that anymore at all. All of these, again, I have belly boards. This thing is roughly 2 foot long, or maybe closer to 30 inches. It's roughly 1/2 inch at the tip and 1.5 inches at the end. Because you cut a belly or inspection window. So you got the nose to like middle of the belly is all the farther that thing's got to be, and that's exactly what that is. So I use the same belly board for all my raccoons, but for these two, raccoons only, smaller raccoons, these two boards I use for skunks, and I use the narrow size for badgers. I've tried getting a badger on these bigger sized ones, and the shape just is not right for badger. So I put my badgers all on this narrow size as well. And again, for badgers, I don't honestly even know what the size gradients are for badgers. They only go on about so far. They have a little thicker hide like a raccoon, so you can't stretch them really, even if you wanted to. And I just put them on there till I feel like they're about the tension I want them, and pin them on. So medium-sized ones get used for raccoons and badgers, and they also get used for some of my bigger skunks. I catch some skunks that are 3 or 4 XL skunks. You know, some that are, some that won't fit in a 5-gallon pail. They're that big. And I will put them on this narrower size raccoon board. So again, these are kind of an all-purpose board for me. And I did mention earlier in the video, I'm going to be making some more narrow raccoon boards over the summer. I'm going to make as many as I can get out of a sheet of plywood, which I think I can get 8 out of a sheet of plywood. So basically on a sheet of plywood, these are only 5 feet long. You make one this way, and then one that way, and one this way, and one that way. And the noses kind of nestle inside of each other. So for example, like what it'd be is when you're cutting the plywood, it ends up being kind of like that. And you don't really end up with very much scrap like between the two. Here, let's show you a little better what that would look like. So essentially you would have 2 coming from one side of your sheet of plywood, and the third one comes like that. So you really only have like that little kind of Y piece there, and you end up with almost no waste down in the middle. And then like I said, that would be 8 feet to the top, to the bottom. So I can get 8 of these guys out of one sheet of plywood. So we're going to be making some more over the summer because I've been putting up more skunks lately than I ever have. Again, I use them for badgers, and I want to be using them for some of the smaller skunks or smaller raccoons. And I only have 6 of them, so I don't have enough really to do as many animals as I'd like each weekend. So we're going to be making a few more of these, so stay tuned for that video. With that, I'm going to make 6 of this size. I'm actually going to make one wide one, but I want one that's 6 foot tall. Because I get raccoons every now and then that are like 6XL long, or even longer than that even. Like that 32.6 pounder I caught a few years ago. He wouldn't have fit on here at all. His butt was like this far down on that board, and he had a full tail. So his tail was sticking off like 6 inches beyond this guy. So I actually put him up on my Otter board, even though the shape isn't quite right. But I had him tan for myself, so there's a difference there. When you're tanning them for yourself, it really doesn't matter what shape you make them. If I'm going to sell my fur, which I do with 98% of the fur I catch, I sell, I want to make sure it's made to the sizes they want. And like I said, I know FHA's raccoon board, they have one board. It's actually more of that shape, so that's my Otter board. It seems like it's really fat at the top, and I do not like the look of that on a raccoon. So I like mine being a little more pointy at the nose. So I'm going to be making 6 more of these. I'm going to make a 6 foot long wide version. So I'll actually have one extra one. I can use it for any size raccoon. I just want a long one in case I do get one really big, or a couple really big raccoons. I could put him up and not have to worry about their tail hanging off these 5-footers. But otherwise, 5-footers have always got me by. I probably only have had 2 or 3 over the years that have been too long for a 5-foot board. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but I have had ones that are too long for a 5-foot board. So back to the narrow ones. So we're going to be making some more narrow ones, narrow raccoon boards. So I put small raccoons, badgers, and I put bigger skunks on these narrower boards, but I actually use some of these my original boards. I got about a half dozen of these, the narrow version. I got roughly a half dozen of these, the small NAFA size, and I put my smaller skunks on there. And the skunk sizing is the same as raccoons, so I do actually have them marked on here. Again, this is like a poplar board or an aspen board or something, but they warped on me really bad. So it's got like a little curve to the bottom. I don't know if I can get that to stand there. So it actually goes down and it curves like this, and then the board is puckered. So the board is actually like this. It's hard to really see that, but it's kind of like this. So what I do is I make sure my belly is on the boat outside, and then my belly board sits on that boat outside. If you put the belly on the warp side, when you put your belly board in there, you still may not be actually like stretching that belly out at all. And I've had trouble getting them off if I don't pay attention. So that's one thing I really like about the plywood boards, is I do not have to worry about them warping. I've never had one warp, where some of these other ones, even like a few of my Coyote stretchers with the 1x4s, I've actually had them warp, you know, like this and whatever. So, all right, so raccoons only on the biggest size, raccoons, skunks, and badgers on the narrow size, and then on these real small ones, it's basically skunks only, and typically those smaller skunks. And that's kind of why I want a few more of these medium-sized ones, because sometimes I run out of those. Like I said, if I got raccoons on there or a badger on some, I sometimes don't have enough to put the bigger skunks I'm putting up on there as well, and I end up putting bigger skunks on some of these smaller boards, and I don't like that. So that's why we're going to build a few more of those, and I am going to build one more 5-foot-long, narrow-sized raccoon size. So the 8 boards I'm going to make, one big one that's 6 foot, 6 of the narrow size raccoon or the medium size raccoon, and one of the narrowest size. All these guys require belly boards. Again, I just have a stockpile of these belly boards, and I'm actually going to make a few more, because I'm going to make a few more stretchers, and I'm going to try and make them all a little more consistent. Essentially, like that board, that belly board was a scrap between like where that Y was when I was showing you, when I have my other one sitting in here. Most of my belly boards come from the scraps that were in between some of these boards when I made them out of the sheets of plywood. All right, beaver boards. I only have 2 beaver boards. I have 3 actually, I take that back. But one of them, I have a table. It's actually FHA's beaver table design. I'm going to make a video of that as well. When I do, I will drop it down in the links below, or in the description below the table itself. And I'm also going to be making some more beaver boards this summer. It might even be like the next video after this one. When I get that video done, I will actually link that in the description as well. So what this is a 3/4 inch sheet of plywood. So it's quite a bit thicker than, like, you know, this guy. You know, you can see it's quite a bit thicker. And I think for beaver, you definitely want the thicker plywood. The beaver, when they, dry, they shrink. And I think if you had like a 1/2 or 3/8, especially sheet of plywood, I think your plywood would go as your pelt dried, and then you keep losing sizes as it shrunk. So this guy is 4 foot tall, and it is 1/3 of a sheet of plywood. So it's roughly 32 inches minus a saw cut in between this board and the next one. So again, I got 3 of these out of a sheet of plywood. One of them I leave in my skinning table all the time, and I actually don't even have the the rings on that one. I just leave it in there all the time. The nice thing about that table is I can just pop one board out, put the next one in, and it holds my board nice and flat and solid while I'm putting my hide on there. And then I can just pop it out, put my board to the side, put the next board in there, nail the next beaver on, and so on. One thing I wanted to make a point I just thought of. So for my split stretchers for fox and coyotes, I stand them all the time. You know, when I have fur on them, they're always standing like we're shown. For all these raccoon boards, I have a hole, like a 1/2 inch hole drilled in the bottom of these. Here, it's right there and right there. So I have a hole drilled in every one of those. So when I'm putting up my fur on the raccoons, so badgers I will stand on the floor, so they'll stand just like this is. But for raccoons and skunks, I actually hang them upside down on a nail in one of the floor joists of my basement down there. What that does is it actually gets any grease that's going to run and drip off of them. It actually runs and it drips off the nose. And then I just put like a paper towel there, you know, blue shop rag. A lot of times I'll use them, you know, for wiping off my table and whatever. And then once they're already a little grungy, I'll just fold them up and stick them underneath where my pelts are. And so if it does drip grease, it just drips on that grease rag and not onto my floor. But I do hang all those from my floor joists when I have fur on them. All the raccoons, when I have skunks and raccoons on them, they hang from the ceiling. Beaver boards, I typically try. I have them marked on both sides, and we'll get into the markings here in just a second. I have it marked on both sides, but I almost always only put beavers on one side. I've had issues with setting a beaver or having a beaver on a board and setting it like this, especially when they're freshly on there. I've had problems with my beaver like sagging, like the actual pelt sagging down, and then it like rippled up around the bottom down here. If they're partly dry already, so if they've been on there so maybe a day or two, then I can set them like this and they won't shrink or won't sag like that. I've also had issues if I leave them too loose, and I tend to leave my beavers probably a little looser than some. So I like to be able to grab my beaver and pull, you know, maybe this far up in the middle after he's fully nailed on. I want to make sure there's some slack. Like I said, I typically have only put up 2 beavers at one, you know, one on each board, and then I lay them down flat. What I actually do is I have a piece of cardboard laid on my deep freeze down in my basement, and so I don't scratch up the lid of my deep freeze. And then I just set these 2, you know, next to each other, and I just put a weight up by the wall so they don't tip and fall off of there. So with that in mind, like I said, I've never had very good luck with putting one on one side and one on the other, because then they literally will, you know, the one on the bottom will literally like sag out in the middle, and I can't get them back flat once they do that. So I don't know, some guys I see them, they have just rows of these stacked up just standing like they are. That's never worked for me, so they must be putting them on tighter. I don't know if I don't have quite the right humidity and temperature for drying them to get them to dry quick enough so they don't sag, or what the deal is. But we're gonna make a few more of these beaver boards over the summer. I do have them marked on both sides, so if I have a beaver on one side, if I have him say dry in probably 2 good days, after that second day, then I can actually put one on the back side. And my beaver table, or my table I have down there, doesn't have anything in the middle of it, so when I set this in there, you can have a beaver on the underside and it doesn't hit anything on my table in there. Again, stay tuned. There's be a video of me actually making some new boards, and probably a video of the table itself, what my table looks like. And again, I will link them down below in the description when and if I actually get the videos done. All right, next species is mink. These boards are a little tougher to see. So I have 2 different size mink boards, because mink, the males and females are a little bit different stretcher shape or stretcher size. If I put these 2 like on each other here, and I got this side here pretty well lined up, but you can see like the male board, you know, is a 1/2 inch wider all the way along. These guys, I don't know if they're 3 feet, maybe a little less than 3 feet long, you know, 34 inches or something. And then I do have the actual sizes marked on there for both the male and the female. The female only has just the 2 size increments, so it's got below 17, 17 to 19, and 19 and over. And then on the male board, and I do have them marked, there's it's an M that way, and this one I have an F written on there. I have about 3 of each. Again, I only catch a couple mink a season, but it is nice that when I am putting them up, I have enough boards to put all my mink up at once. I actually have inherited all my mink boards. I don't think I've bought any of them, or if I have, I bought them with something else. You know, maybe got some with some muskrat stretchers or something once upon a time. But I've measured these according to like the NAFA sizes and the FHA sizes. Both of these are a little bit wide at the top for what they want them to be. But again, they've worked good for me. They're roughly 3/8 thick. They're like a pine board, I think. I'm not even real sure. The male board here actually is, the board itself is cupped a little like that. Yeah, the board is cupped a little like, you know, like this on both sides. So it's thinner on the edge. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to see that, but it's, you know, it's only maybe a 1/4 inch wide on the edge where it's 3/8 wide in the middle. These guys as well require belly boards, so I have some small belly boards that are not nearly as tall as those. So they're almost like down to nothing at the top, and they're only maybe a 1/2 inch at the tail. Because again, it's such a small animal, I don't want to be overstretching the belly trying to put my belly board in there. So male mink also have 4 sizes. So there's one size, there's a size, here's a size, and there's a size. There are 5 sizes probably below that, middle, 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 and then beyond this. Almost all my mink end up beyond the farther size, and even my female mink almost always end up, even the young of the year, end up past the longest size on the female board. So yeah, I have about 3 of each. I don't honestly even know. I keep 2 in my house all the time, and then I have a few extra ones down in my trapping shed if I need them. Yeah, you need belly boards with them. Again, I got the holes drilled on the bottom so I can hang them upside down for my 4 joists. All right, now we're gonna get into muskrat stretchers. So I have, let's see, can I get this in front of this board? Easy to see, yeah, there we go. So I got 3 different varieties of wire stretchers, 3 different brands that I've accumulated over the years. And I also have a few wood stretchers. So we'll go kind of into each one. I do have a video out there on resizing and shaping my muskrat stretchers, because most of the stretchers I've bought over the years were way too wide at the bottom. Like this stretcher here in particular was almost like 2 inches wider at the bottom than what the muskrat's supposed to be stretched at. So that extra 2 inches was costing me at least one size every muskrat I put on there. This one here, you could see I actually welded just a little dot of weld there, so this guy can't open up any farther than that. And then this one here, it's riveted in the middle, so I just bent that down at that little V there, and that tightened up that bottom down to the width I needed it to be. So there are some pros and cons of each of these. So this one here, you can see has 3 hooks or teeth on the hooks, and you use 1 hook on the belly side, 1 on the tail side or the top side. The 3 hooked ones seem to work really nice for me, because I actually hooked the middle tooth, I guess. There's 3 teeth. I hooked the middle tooth in the vent of the muskrat on the one side, and then the middle tooth kind of in the middle of the back on the other side. And that tends to, what it does is you have the middle tooth, and it kind of keeps your tail laying flat up against that piece, and it don't like wrap around the end, and I typically don't have any trouble getting them off. Where this side, this variety here, that's got kind of a washer slide on the bottom, it only has 2 teeth on the hooks there, and those work okay, but I do not like them as good. When I'm trapping muskrat hards, I typically have all my stretchers used, so I use them. I have roughly 5 dozen total, and I have about a dozen of these that only got the 2 teeth on there. I got about 18 of these that got the 3 teeth on there, which I really like. And then I have about 18 of this style here. This style, if you watch my video, I actually just straightened out the bottom and then made my own wood for it. And then you can see I drilled a hole in there. These also have 3 teeth on there. This is by far the favorite of my stretchers I have. The nice thing I like about how I modified these is they're 3 inches longer. So if I grab this guy, so you can see how much longer they are than that other style. So if I have like a 3XL Muskrat, the style with like the 2 teeth and that other one there, a 3XL Muskrat, I can't hardly get my hook slid far enough down in order to actually get them tight on there, where that one that I just straightened the sides out and put the board across, I can. So I put almost all my muskrats up on wire. I mean, probably 98% again I put up on wire. I do have a few wood ones, some homemade wood ones that I've gotten over the years, and then I have some medium top watch stretcher ones. The only time I use wood ones is if I happen to make a mistake skinning and I split the lip on the nose, then sometimes I have a hard time keeping them on a wire stretcher, keeping the nose from peeling off the top of the wire stretcher. Then I use a wood one. That's basically the only time I ever use the wood ones. And I have, I don't know, a dozen of the medium-sized top watch stretcher ones. They're super nice boards. Sorry, I just got a piece of debris in my mouth from the wind blowing here. So I use the wood ones only when I split the lip. And the top watch stretchers are super nice, and I use them most out of any of them. And I have probably a dozen and a half homemade ones, and they're all a little bit different, varying in the sizes. Once in a while, I'll put like the super small muskrats, like the real short kit ones. I'll put them on a wood one only just because they're a little bit narrower, and it doesn't overstretch. It doesn't basically make like a V out of some of them real short kits. So I got 3 different styles of wire ones. And again, I have roughly 60 of them, 5 dozen. I'm probably gonna try and buy a few more. I would like to have maybe even close to 100. So the muskrats, I try to skin, flesh, and put on stretchers the day I catch them. But with 60 or 55, whatever I have of them, basically some years, like a few years ago, I was catching 30 plus a day. That's like a day, and I don't even get the second day all on there. So basically what I was doing is like every other day roughly, I would put some up today. Tomorrow I just freeze them, and then the next day I put them up again. But then again, I need like almost a whole week or weekend to dry that extra day in between that I wasn't getting put up. So I'd like to have a few more, because I typically in my basement down here when I'm running my line, it takes about 3 days to get them dry. 2 days you could probably take them off and they'd be okay. I don't want to typically leave them longer than 3 days, because then they do get a little papery. But the nice thing is about this is the way I got these bent and shaped, they're not bowed out really bad on the sides. And I think that's where some guys gripe about the wire ones, that if they're bowed out and then when you put your muskrat on there, it straightens the sides out. Well, that's constantly putting pressure on your muskrat, and then it will like overstretch your muskrats. With mine being basically the shape they need to be right from the get-go, I don't typically have that problem. So, all right, we're just about done. Down to the last species that I have boards for. These are Weasel boards. So you can see I just bought a real thin, this is a poplar board, popple tree. Again, I got holes in them. My muskrat stretcher wood ones, I have holes. And then these wood ones here, I do have a hole in that one as well. And then all the rest of my muskrat stretchers, I hang all my muskrats upside down as well from my floorboards in my basement. I do have 2 Weasel boards now. This one's a top watch stretcher Weasel board. It don't have any of the size increments. This one here is one I made myself, so I cut it to, I believe, NAFA's size, because again, I shipped most of my fur to NAFA back in the day. So it's NAFA shape, and I did put the size increments on there. I don't think I ever have had one go past the medium line on there, or past the large line. I've had mediums, but nothing beyond that. So This board, I just left it the original stock length. It was a 3-foot board and I trimmed it down. I have the holes in the bottom. Again, with these, I need belly boards. With the Muskrat wood boards, you need belly boards with those as well. Where the wire stretchers, then the really nice thing about those is you do not need belly boards to go with them. So if I had to have belly boards for all those Muskrat ones, you know, you'd have a huge stack of them. And then, you know, you would want them super thin too. Like you only want, again, almost nothing at the head end down to maybe a 1/2 inch at the tail is all the Muskrat stretchers need to be. Otherwise, you're really like stretching the belly when you put them in there. So, and then with these Weasel boards, oh, Mink boards too, you need belly boards for those, if I didn't say that already. So with the Weasel boards, essentially what I've used, I do have a couple of top watch stretchers belly boards. So they're like an 1/8 inch thick by 1/4 inch wide little board. They work really nice. I have used a pencil in the past, like a wood pencil, or I've used a 1/4 inch dowel rod. And that's actually worked just as good as anything else, is a 1/4 inch dowel rod. It's almost too much for, you know, the Weasels are super small. You know, you almost overstretch the belly by putting a belly board in them sometimes, but you have to or you would never get them off your board. I think that's about it on the Weasel boards. Again, they're pretty simple. I do have the length increments on here. I don't have them on the top lot one that I bought. Again, you would never stretch one. If he's like halfway in between a small and a medium for me, there's no way I would ever be able to stretch them past that medium line. So again, I use them as a form board. So I just put them on there until they're kind of snug on there and then pin them on. I don't stretch them. I don't want to be pulling, especially a Weasel, you know, you're not going to gain very much on a Weasel. So, all right, I think that's it. Oh, storage of all my stretchers. I want to go over that just real quick. So what I do is in my farmhouse here, the attic is a full attic upstairs. There's no insulation or nothing up there. So what I do is I actually lay, like I'll stack these kind of how they're standing. You know, I'll go stretcher, 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 stretcher. And then I'll actually put like a Beaver board on top and I just lay them on the floor up there. So I have like a row of Raccoon stretchers, a Beaver board, a row of Coyote stretchers, Beaver board, and then I just keep stacking. So, you know, I'll get a 6-inch tall stack by, you know, this size by that long, you know, 6 foot long, 4 foot wide stack. And I'll just make rows out of them and stack them. And by putting the Beaver boards and stuff on there, and I actually have set like extra weight on top of them as well. And that keeps all my boards nice and flat, or as flat as I can keep them. It's fairly low humidity up there. It does get warm up there in the summertime, but it's like 0 humidity up there all the time. It's super dry. So I don't have any warping issues or anything by doing that. So I stack them in layers. You know, I make sure my whole layer is all the same thickness of board. So if I'm making a layer, it's going to be a layer of all 3/4 boards and then a layer of all 1/2 inch thick boards, you know, and whatever I have, you know. And then like the Muskrat stretchers and that type of stuff, I actually stick them in a basically a 5-gallon pail. And all my belly boards, I just stand them in a 5-gallon pail. The wire Raccoon stretchers, I actually have a big box, a cardboard box that's, I don't know, 18 inches square, and I can get all my Raccoon or Muskrat stretchers in that. So I just kind of make sure that the catches are all kind of in line with the actual stretcher, kind of how this one here was setting. They moved a little bit, but I get them essentially folded up like that. You know, I try to get them so they're more in line with that wood on there, but then I can just stack one right after the other in that big cardboard box. Those I actually leave set down in my basement. But otherwise, all the wood stuff I stick up in my attic so it stays nice and low humidity up there and it stays dry up there. And so far that's kept all my stretcher from warping, you know, too bad. Some of these popple board ones and a few of those, I had them leaning in my basement for one summer and then they warped because they were leaning up like this against the wall on the top, and then they did this as they sat there and leaned. And that's how a couple of my Coyote stretchers got warped too, is they were standing down in my basement too long. Because it gets kind of wet and humid down there. and that caused them to warp. So, all right, I feel like there's a lot of information in here. Again, there's going to be, I already got videos for the fox and raccoon, or fox, coyote, and the muskrats. I'm going to drop those links in the description right away here. As I make a few of these other videos, as I make raccoon boards and as I make beaver boards and probably my beaver table, I'll put links to those videos down in the description of this as well. So that will go through like how I make the size and shape of them, and how like the beaver boards, how I mark all the lines and everything on there. That'll all be in the making of the beaver board video. If you have any questions on the structures themselves, what I'm using for any particular species, that type of stuff, feel free to leave comments down below. Again, look down in the description. There'll be links to how I make some of these. The ones I already have done will be in the links or in the description right away. And if I do make videos on how I make like more raccoon boards and the beaver boards, and maybe I'll take a video of what my beaver table looks like, I'll link those down in the description as I get them done. So stay tuned for a couple of those videos. If you have any other questions on anything I'm doing on my line, any of the gear I'm using, either putting up fur, so you know, fleshing beam, fleshing knife, any of that stuff, or like I said, any gear I'm using, you know, to actually set traps and that type of stuff, or any questions at all on how I'm doing anything out on my line, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I try to, you know, answer comments down there. I actually like to have the back and forth feedback down there. Again, if I can explain it well enough, you know, in a comment or something like that, I'll try to maybe do an update to this video. So I encourage you guys to actually go below any of my videos and read through the comments. There ain't always a lot of comments or any comments on them, but on some like this, if there are comments down there, most likely they're going to be kind of a helpful type comment. So there sometimes are a little more information than I got in the video down in the comments down below as I reply to people's questions. So I encourage you to read through the comments, because again, there might be some more information down there that, you know, I didn't get into the video itself. So, all right, I think that's all I got for you guys today. Again, there's a lot of different stuff, a lot of information in this video. I hope it's helpful to you guys. Otherwise, we'll see you guys on the next one.